Republicans also complain about a big government and giving power to the states. Either they don't know, they must have forgotten, or they don't want the people to know that the United States has already had a small national government where the states had the power. And it did not work, which is the reason for the Constitution of the United States that replaced the Articles of Confederation, which preceded the Constitution of the United States. The Articles of Confederation consisted of a small national government, and the states had the power. And an insurrection in Massachusetts called Shays' Rebellion proved unequivocally that big government was necessary. The insurrection caused Massachusetts to ask for help from the national government, which was powerless to do anything. Although it should have had the power to help Massachusetts, but the Articles of Confederation did exactly what Republicans today want. It gave independent power to the states and provided a small national government. As a result of this, Massachusetts had to deal with Shays' Rebellion with no help from the national government. Just think where the United States would be today if the states had the power and the federal government was small. The states would have made their own independent decisions concerning slavery. As a result, some of the states would have undoubtedly continued slavery even into the 21st century and beyond. There would have never been an Emancipation Proclamation to be signed by Abraham Lincoln. All of the states would be on their own to deal with all weather disasters, and they would have no federal government to go to ask for federal money, because these same Republicans talking small federal government ask the federal government for help when their state is in need, which is hypocritical. And these Republicans know a big federal government is necessary in order to provide for the states when they're in need. Under the Constitution of the United States, federal legislation that becomes law applies to all states in the United States and supersedes any laws those individual states may have that contradicts the federal law. In other words, all states have to follow the federal laws. This is the reason voting rights legislation is being addressed heavily at the federal level, because once federal voting rights legislation has been signed into law by the president, it will nullify all individual state laws concerning voting rights, and all states will have to obey the federal law, which will apply equally to all states. This is also the reason that people with the least of these mindset have to be elected to federal office. This bypasses having to get least of these legislation passed in each individual state, which could result in many people not receiving any money. And the people in the states that pass universal basic income could end up receiving varying amounts of money with strings attached. There would be too many variables, and time is of the essence, as federal universal basic income is necessary and should be passed and signed into law immediately. Least of these legislation passed at the federal level will apply equally to all states. So once $2,000 in United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income for all poor and middle class citizens at least 18 years of age, funded through the Federal Reserve, is signed into law by the president, all states will have to follow the law. As I stated before, House members and senators earn $174,000 annually. House majority and minority leaders earn $193,400 annually. The Speaker of the House earns $223,500 annually. The Vice President of the United States earns $230,700 annually, and the President of the United States earns $400,000 annually. So we're talking about good-paying jobs here. Dig it? It's time to get a least of these economies started for poor and middle-class people in the United States. And it's going to take people with the least of these economic mindset to get elected to office. How many of you are struggling financially? How many of you have struggled financially in the past? How many of you are working for less than $22 per hour? How many of you feel like the corporation you're providing low-wage labor for has been getting over on you since you've been working for them? How many of you know people who are struggling financially? How many of you know people who are homeless? How many of you have friends and family attempting to live on a fixed income that is not enough for them to live on? How many of you have had enough of the government placing money in the hands of the rich through trickle-down economic policies, while your friends and family are struggling financially to make it? It is time for an economic change in the United States, and trickle-up economics is a necessity. If you have a least of these mindset and agree with the least of these legislative proposals I've covered in lectures, consider running for elective office in your district, because it is time to dispose of trickle-down economics and replace it with trickle-up economics. A least of these crew is needed in federal government. In order to get least of these legislation passed, which include $2,000 in monthly United States federal government guaranteed universal basic income, funded through the Federal Reserve, mass numbers of politicians will need to be voted out of office. Republicans and Democrats. The United States needs a government filled with people who support least of these legislation.